The sun rises over the golden sands of Egypt, painting the horizon in hues of amber and fire. But as the light spreads across the ancient land, it glints not only off the pyramids, but off something taller, sharper, and infinitely more mysterious. Slender stone giants pierce the desert sky, monuments of power, carved with divine precision thousands of years ago. These are Egypt's obelisks, the forgotten pillars that once touched the heavens, embodying the might of pharaohs and the favor of gods. Yet today, many of these towering wonders are gone stolen, shattered, or buried beneath centuries of silence. This is their story, the story of the lost obelisks of Egypt. For centuries, travelers have stood before the last remaining obelisks and wondered, how were they made? Each one carved from a single piece of red granite, quarried hundreds of miles from the Nile, weighing hundreds of tons. They were not built, they were born, chiseled from the living rock by the hands of craftsmen who had no iron, no cranes, and no machines. Yet somehow, they raised these colossal spires upright with mathematical perfection. To the ancient Egyptians, obelisks were not mere stone, they were sunlight in solid form, a bridge between earth and sky. Their pointed tips, often gilded with gold, were designed to catch the first rays of dawn, symbolizing rebirth and divine connection. The pharaohs believed that by erecting an obelisk, they could capture a fragment of eternity itself. But as time passed, the obelisks became more than sacred symbols. They became a message. Each one bore inscriptions that celebrated the ruler's victories, divine ancestry, and eternal power. To read an obelisk was to read the pharaoh's soul carved in stone. Yet beneath this glory lies a mystery that still puzzles archaeologists today. How did these monuments, some weighing over 300 tons, travel from quarries in Aswan to temples hundreds of kilometers away? Legends speak of immense barges sailing down the Nile, guided by priests and thousands of laborers. Modern experiments have tried to replicate the feat, and failed. It's as if the ancients possessed an understanding of balance, geometry, and stone that modern minds have forgotten. As we journey through Egypt's ancient landscape, we find traces of these lost wonders scattered across the world. Paris, Rome, London, Istanbul, each guards an Egyptian obelisk taken during the Age of Empire. The Luxor obelisk now stands proudly at the Place de la Concorde, its twin still rooted in Luxor, marking the gateway to the Temple of Ramses Roman II. They were separated by centuries of conquest and politics, yet their stories remain intertwined, a silent reminder of Egypt's once unshakable influence. To modern tourists, they are beautiful relics. To ancient Egyptians, they were living prayers carved in stone. But among all that remain, one stands unfinished, the great unfinished Obelisk of Aswan, the largest ever attempted. Still lying where it was carved, cracked and abandoned, it offers a haunting glimpse into the scale of ancient ambition. Had it been completed, it would have stood taller than any other structure of its time, over 40 meters high, weighing more than 1,000 tons. Its surface still bears the marks of ancient tools, frozen mid-stroke, as if the workers vanished in an instant. Some believe it was abandoned because of a fatal crack in the stone. Others whisper of omens and divine warnings. Whatever the truth, that unfinished monument remains one of Egypt's greatest archaeological mysteries, proof of human genius and limits intertwined. And yet, despite the grandeur of their design and the mystery of their creation, the obelisks hold a deeper meaning, one that transcends history. They stand as symbols of light overcoming darkness, of man reaching for the divine. To the Egyptians, the obelisk was the petrified ray of the sun god Ra, a cosmic beacon linking heaven and earth. Every sunrise reflected not just light, but the belief that life could be renewed, that power could be eternal. That is why pharaohs across dynasties competed to build taller, grander, and more perfect obelisks than those before them. It wasn't just a race for glory. It was a spiritual competition to claim a place among the gods. But while many still stand, proud and defiant, others lie hidden beneath the sands, lost to earthquakes, wars, and time itself. Each discovery of a buried obelisk is like unearthing a voice from the past, whispering across millennia. These monuments once watched over temple courtyards, reflected sunlight onto sacred altars, and marked the heart of Egypt's devotion. Now they call out again, waiting to be found. The question is, what else sleeps beneath the sands, waiting to rise once more? As we move deeper into the ancient world of Egypt, the obelisks begin to reveal their hidden stories. Tales not just of divine worship, but of unmatched engineering genius. To understand their power, we must return to where they were born, the granite quarries of Aswan, where the beating heart of Egyptian stonecraft once echoed. It was here that the raw granite, harder than steel and almost unbreakable, was cut from the earth with nothing but dolerite pounders, patience, and precision. Imagine hundreds of workers toiling under the relentless desert sun, hammering, chiseling, polishing, every strike guided not by machines, but by intuition and inherited skill. These were not mere laborers. They were artists serving the gods through stone. The process began with the selection of the perfect block, a task that required almost supernatural judgment. A single imperfection could ruin months of labor. Once chosen, the workers would carve trenches around it using pounding stones, separating it from the bedrock with sheer human strength. The entire monolith was crafted while still lying flat, carved from a single continuous piece. It is here, in the Unfinished Obelisk of Aswan, that we see the fingerprints of history frozen in time. The tool marks, the incomplete inscriptions, the subtle fault lines that brought the project to an end. Standing beside it today, one cannot help but feel awe. This monument, though never raised, captures the raw ambition of a civilization that refused to accept the limits of human capability. But carving was only the beginning. The greater challenge came in moving the colossal stones, some weighing hundreds of tons, from the quarry to the temples of Thebes, Heliopolis, or Karnak. Without wheels capable of bearing such weight, the Egyptians devised ingenious methods using sledges dragged over mud, lubricated pathways, their motion eased by water poured before them. The secret of their success lay in rhythm and coordination, hundreds of workers moving in unison, chanting songs that set the pace. These ancient songs, some say, were not just to encourage the workers, but to maintain harmony between human effort and divine will. As the massive stones slid across the earth, they believed the gods themselves guided their path. When the obelisks reached the river, they were loaded onto enormous wooden barges, floating platforms engineered with astonishing foresight. Archaeologists still debate the exact techniques, but ancient inscriptions and later depictions suggest that the obelisks were placed horizontally, balanced carefully with counterweights. The journey down the Nile was more than a logistical triumph. It was a sacred procession. The priests would sail alongside, chanting prayers to Ra, ensuring the spirit of the obelisk remained pure on its passage from quarry to temple. The river, for the Egyptians, was a living artery, a connection between the land of the living and the realm of the divine. As each obelisk sailed upon its surface, it symbolized the union of earth, water, and sun. Upon arrival at its destination, the final and most perilous task awaited raising the obelisk upright. Even today, the method remains a mystery that defies complete explanation. Some theories suggest the use of sand pits gradually emptied to let the monument tilt upward. Others imagine massive ramps or lever systems of wooden beams and ropes. Yet none can fully account for the precision achieved. The way these stones were raised so flawlessly, without cracks, and aligned perfectly with celestial markers. When an obelisk finally stood tall before the temple gates, It was not merely an architectural feat. It was a resurrection. The moment the golden tip caught the first light of dawn, the pharaoh's name inscribed on its face was believed to ascend to the heavens. The entire kingdom would witness it as a divine affirmation. The ruler was chosen by the gods, his legacy carved in stone for eternity. And as centuries passed, the obelisks became more than monuments. They became signatures of dynastic pride. Each new pharaoh sought to outshine his predecessors. Thutmose III, Hatshep, Sut, Ramses II, all left behind obelisks that told stories of conquest, faith, and eternal life. The temples of Karnak and Luxor became forests of stone, their courtyards alive with shafts of sunlight filtering through towering granite spires. To stand among them was to stand within a living hymn, every surface engraved with prayers, every angle aligned with the cosmos. It is in these temples that we begin to feel the pulse of Egypt's spiritual heart, the rhythm of a civilization that spoke to the gods through geometry and stone. But time, as always, began its quiet conquest. Earthquakes toppled some, wars claimed others. Many were stolen by foreign empires, their purpose twisted into trophies of power. Yet even when shattered or displaced, the obelisks carried with them the spirit of Egypt, indestructible, eternal. And, as the sands continued to shift, hiding ancient cities and temples, they left behind clues, symbols that still call out to those who dare to listen. As the obelisks rose in the heart of Egypt, they became more than monuments of faith. They were messages carved in stone, each one whispering the ambitions, fears, and beliefs of those who commanded their creation. To the ancient Egyptians, the obelisk was not simply a structure. It was a living bridge between the human and the divine. The sharp pinnacle, often capped with gold or electrum, captured the first light of dawn and the last glow of sunset, serving as a physical conduit to the sun god Ra. The entire form symbolized the primordial ray of sunlight that first broke through chaos to create life itself. Every time the morning sun struck its gleaming top, it was as if the gods were reawakening creation. This connection between stone and sunlight gave the obelisks an aura that drew both reverence and fear. The inscriptions along their sides were not decorative. They were incantations of immortality. The pharaoh's name, chiseled with divine precision, was a promise that his soul would rise eternally with the sun. In that sense, every obelisk was a prayer turned to stone, its surface alive with sacred words meant to echo through eternity. But beyond this spiritual symbolism lay an equally profound political message. Each new ruler who raised an obelisk proclaimed his divine right to rule, his alignment with cosmic order, the Egyptian concept of man. To erect such a monument was to declare mastery not only over the physical world, but over the eternal cycle of creation and rebirth. In cities like Heliopolis, the city of the sun, obelisks stood as sentinels to the solar cult that dominated Egyptian theology. It was here that the world's first obelisks were said to have been erected, standing before massive temple gates, framing the entrance like twin rays of sunlight in stone. The priests of Ra saw these monuments as the very embodiment of divine light on earth. Pilgrims who approached them were believed to receive the blessing of the gods simply by standing in their shadow. And as the centuries unfolded, the tradition spread from Heliopolis to Thebes, Luxor, and beyond. Each new temple complex crowned with its own sacred obelisks, each one dedicated to a god, a ruler, or a celestial event. But not all obelisks served temples alone. Some marked the triumphs of pharaohs, silent witnesses to great military victories or monumental achievements. When Thutmose III, the warrior king, expanded Egypt's empire into the heart of the Near East, he commissioned obelisks to celebrate his divine favor and unmatched strength. Queen Hatshep, Sut, one of Egypt's most remarkable rulers, raised hers at Karnak, boasting that no monument like it had ever been made in the reign of any man or woman. Her obelisks still stand as defiant proof of her brilliance, carved with words that dared the centuries to forget her name. Even Ramses Roman II, known as the builder of builders, used obelisks as instruments of legacy, each one an eternal echo of his claim to divine kingship. And yet, as we look at these towering stones, the mystery deepens. How did the Egyptians achieve such perfection, aligning these immense shafts of granite with the sun and stars so precisely, without modern tools or machinery? The alignment of some obelisks with solstices and equinoxes suggests a mastery of astronomy that continues to astonish modern scientists. The ancient builders were not guessing. They were calculating, observing, and executing with an understanding of the cosmos that blurred the line between science and spirituality. The Egyptians believed that harmony with the heavens was harmony with life itself, and the obelisks stood as their silent proof of that union. For the ancient people who lived in their shadow, these stones were not relics, they were alive. They believed the gods could inhabit such monuments, listening to prayers and transmitting blessings through the energy of the sun. When the rays of Ra touched the golden tip of an obelisk, it was thought that divine light traveled down its shaft into the temple, energizing the rituals performed within. The obelisk thus became the axis of divine energy, a literal link between the heavens and the earth. Standing beneath one today, even in silence, there's a strange sensation, a hum that seems to vibrate through time. The stones themselves appear to remember, their surfaces still warm with sunlight that fell thousands of years ago. Tourists may see mere relics of a lost civilization, but to the ancient Egyptians, these were living witnesses, guardians of cosmic truth. Every inscription, every hieroglyph was a heartbeat in stone, reminder that power, when born of divine harmony, could transcend death itself. And yet, the story of these monuments was far from over. As time marched forward, their destiny began to shift. What once symbolized Egypt's unity with the gods would soon become trophies for conquerors, symbols of prestige for empires far from the Nile. The obelisks carved under the desert sun would travel across continents, finding new homes in lands that had never known Ra's light. The journey of these stones was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would change their meaning forever. When Egypt's glory began to fade and foreign empires cast their gaze upon the Nile, the obelisks, once sacred messengers of the gods, became the ultimate prizes. They were no longer seen as symbols of worship, but as tokens of domination, proof that one empire had conquered another's eternity. The first to understand their power in this new age was Rome. To the Romans, who revered grandeur and spectacle above all, the obelisks of Egypt represented something no Roman monument could equal: divine antiquity. These stones had already stood for over 1,000 years before Rome even rose to power. To possess one was to own a piece of the gods themselves. When Emperor Augustus defeated Cleopatra and annexed Egypt in 30 BC, he claimed more than a kingdom. He inherited its legacy. Among the treasures he carried back to Rome were several of Egypt's greatest obelisks, including the one that would stand proudly in the Circus Maximus. It was not enough for Rome to rule Egypt, it had to absorb its soul. The obelisks, once aligned with the rising sun of Ra, now cast their shadows over Roman arenas and temples dedicated to Jupiter and Mars. To the people of Rome, these monoliths were wonders of the ancient world, proof that their empire had surpassed even the might of the pharaohs. But to the Egyptians who remained behind, the removal of these sacred stones was an act of cosmic disruption, a theft not only of their art but of their connection to the divine. Transporting the obelisks from Egypt to Rome was a monumental task, requiring some of the most sophisticated engineering of the ancient world. Each stone weighed hundreds of tons and had to be carefully lowered, moved across the desert, and shipped across the Mediterranean. Massive barges were constructed, large enough to carry the weight of the monuments and the pride of empires. The Romans used the same Nile routes once sanctified by priests and pharaohs, but the songs of devotion were replaced by the commands of soldiers. The journey was no longer spiritual, it was political theater. As these ancient stones reached Roman soil, they were greeted not with prayers but with cheers. The Romans erected them in their cities with immense ceremony, transforming them into symbols of imperial triumph. The one that now stands in St. Peter's Square, for instance, once adorned the palace of the Caesars before being moved again during the Renaissance. That single monument has witnessed more than 3,000 years of human history, from the dawn of Egypt to the rise of Christianity. Others found homes in different parts of the empire: Constantinople, London, Paris. Each time an obelisk was moved, its meaning evolved, shifting from divine reverence to political propaganda, and eventually to cultural admiration. Yet, despite all the changes in context and geography, the obelisks retained an air of mystery that no empire could erase. To the Romans, these obelisks were trophies of conquest. To historians, they are reminders of a strange irony. The monuments that once stood as symbols of Egyptian immortality became the very markers of the civilizations that came after. Empires rose and fell around them, yet the obelisks endured. Even the Roman emperors, who thought they had claimed eternity by possessing these stones, have long turned to dust, while the obelisks still stand, untouched by time, carrying the names of pharaohs who ruled millennia ago. Their hieroglyphs, still crisp under the sun, whisper in a language Rome never fully understood. The sight of an Egyptian obelisk rising over the Roman skyline must have stirred both awe and unease. It was as if Egypt's gods had been taken hostage, standing silently in a foreign land, watching over people who worshipped different deities. But perhaps that was part of their power, the ability to transcend culture, religion, and time itself. Even displaced, the obelisks never lost their sacred gravity. They became the great mediators of history, bridges between civilizations, carrying fragments of Egyptian soul into every empire that claimed them. By the time the Roman Empire reached its zenith, the obelisks had become deeply woven into its identity. They marked circuses, decorated forums, and stood as cosmic markers aligning with the movement of the sun. Rome had effectively inherited Egypt's dialogue with the heavens, though it never fully understood its meaning. The obelisks stood tall, indifferent to conquest, untouched by changing gods and rulers. And, as Rome itself began to decline, these ancient witnesses remained, watching yet another great civilization fall into ruin. Still, their journey was not over. Centuries later, when Christianity began to dominate the Western world, many of these obelisks would take on new meanings once again. No longer pagan symbols, but reinterpreted monuments under a new faith. Some would be buried, others forgotten, waiting for another age to rediscover them. But through it all, the power of the obelisk never faded. Its form, its symmetry, its eternal link to light, all continued to inspire awe. Even far from the sands of Egypt, they carried the essence of a civilization that refused to die. When the tides of history turned and the Roman Empire bowed before the rise of Christianity, the world's sacred symbols shifted once again. The old gods of Egypt and Rome were silenced, their temples abandoned, their rituals forgotten. Yet the obelisks remained, standing quietly through the storm of faith and empire. To the new Christian rulers of Rome, these towering monuments were relics of pagan idolatry, echoes of a world they sought to erase. And yet, despite their origins, the obelisks were simply too magnificent to destroy. Their craftsmanship, their perfection, their silent power demanded reverence. Instead of tearing them down, the Church reinterpreted them. transforming these ancient rays of Ra into emblems of a new light, the light of God. One by one, the obelisks that once stood in the centers of pagan worship were crowned with crosses and Christian symbols. The meanings were rewritten. What once represented the power of the sun god now stood as a symbol of the victory of Christianity over the old world. The obelisk in St. Peter's Square became the ultimate testament to this transformation. Originally quarried for a pharaoh, carried to Rome by an emperor, and later raised by a pope, it now overlooked the heart of Christendom. Yet, deep within its granite veins, the hieroglyphs still told a story that no translation could erase. The tale of an ancient civilization that reached for the heavens long before the Vatican existed. During the Middle Ages, the obelisks faded into obscurity. Some toppled and were buried beneath layers of earth and time. Others stood forgotten in overgrown ruins, their origins misunderstood, their purpose misremembered. The ancient knowledge of their alignment, their solar meaning, their connection to the divine, all vanished into the shadows of forgotten scrolls. Europe, shrouded in centuries of turmoil and superstition, had little use for the relics of lost empires. For nearly 1,000 years, the obelisks waited in silence, half buried in the dust, their stories muffled but not lost. Then came the Renaissance, a rebirth of curiosity, art, and rediscovery. Scholars, artists, and engineers began to dig through the ruins of ancient Rome, uncovering monuments that had not seen daylight for centuries. Among these rediscoveries were the Egyptian obelisks, their massive forms once again revealed to the sun. The fascination they inspired was immediate. To Renaissance thinkers, the obelisks were not just relics. They were mysteries, mathematical marvels, and sacred puzzles carved in an unknown language. The hieroglyphs that adorned their sides became the focus of intense study and speculation. Many believed they held divine secrets, ancient wisdom, or even prophecies. In the 16th century, Pope Sixtus V embarked on a grand vision to transform Rome into a city of divine order. He saw the obelisks not as pagan artifacts, but as instruments of spiritual power that could be repurposed to glorify God. Under his orders, engineers began the monumental task of re-erecting the fallen obelisks in key locations across the city. The most famous of these was the raising of the Vatican obelisk in 1586, a feat so daring that it became legend. With thousands of workers, hundreds of horses, and intricate systems of ropes and pulleys, the ancient stone was lifted back to its upright position after lying on its side for centuries. When it finally stood, the crowd erupted in cheers, and the Pope declared that the light of faith had triumphed over the darkness of idolatry. But while the Renaissance redefined the obelisks in the image of Christianity, it also rekindled something older, a sense of wonder for the lost world of Egypt. Artists painted them, poets wrote of them, and scholars dreamed of uncovering their true origins. For the first time in over 1,000 years, the name of Egypt returned to the lips of the learned with reverence. These stones, standing in foreign lands, had become ambassadors of a forgotten civilization, silently calling the world back to the mysteries of the Nile. The fascination would only grow. As Europe's thirst for knowledge deepened, explorers began to travel back to Egypt, searching for the roots of these monuments that had long outlived their creators. Beneath the sands, more obelisks waited, some broken, some buried, but all still whispering. The age of rediscovery was dawning, and with it came the beginning of Egyptology itself. The obelisks, once created to honor the gods, were now guiding humanity toward a new kind of enlightenment, the rediscovery of history itself. Through every era, pagan, Christian, and modern, the obelisks never lost their essence. They were never truly conquered, never fully forgotten. Even as new meanings were imposed upon them, they remained what they had always been, eternal messengers of stone, born from the sun, carved by human hands, and destined to outlast the civilizations that sought to own them. When the age of exploration dawned and Europe's ships began charting the forgotten corners of the world, a new kind of conquest began, not of empires, but of knowledge. Egypt, once the cradle of divine kings and monumental stone, had become a silent desert, its temples buried, its gods nameless, its obelisks half lost beneath the sands. But to explorers of the 18th and 19th centuries, these ruins were irresistible, monuments of mystery that promised to reveal the secrets of humanity's earliest greatness. The obelisks, standing lonely and defiant among crumbling temples, became the symbols of that promise. Their silent inscriptions seemed to call out across time, daring the curious to uncover their meaning. One of the earliest to answer that call was Napoleon Bonaparte. When he invaded Egypt in 1798, his ambitions were not limited to military glory. He brought with him a team of scholars, artists, and scientists, all determined to document the wonders of the Nile. Their work, published as Description de l'Egypte, revealed to Europe for the first time the breathtaking scale and sophistication of ancient Egyptian architecture. Among the discoveries that fascinated them most were the obelisks, those towering, mathematically precise monuments that seemed to defy logic. Sketches, measurements, and studies were made of every visible example, and Europe became obsessed. To the scholars of the Enlightenment, these were not pagan relics. They were the achievements of a civilization so advanced that even modern science could barely grasp its methods. As word spread, Egypt fever swept across Europe. Museums competed to acquire artifacts, collectors financed expeditions, and the world's greatest powers began to see possession of an obelisk as a mark of prestige and intellectual superiority. Britain, France, and the United States would soon join the race to bring these ancient stones to their capitals, each one claiming to preserve history even as they carried it away from its birthplace. Yet before they could move them, they had to understand them. And that understanding came through one of history's most extraordinary discoveries: the Rosetta Stone. Found in 1799 by French soldiers near Rosetta, it contained inscriptions in 3 languages, one of which was ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. When Jean-François Champollion deciphered the code in 1008, the world's oldest language began to speak again. Suddenly, the obelisks could tell their own stories. What had once been mysterious symbols were now revealed to be prayers, dedications, and royal proclamations. The names of forgotten pharaohs re-emerge: Hatshepsut, Thutmose, Ramses, Amenhotep. Each hieroglyphic line that wound up the sides of an obelisk became a voice from the past, describing not myth, but history. The realization changed everything. The obelisks were no longer mute relics. They were living documents, written in stone, preserving a civilization's thoughts and dreams across millennia. Archaeologists began to see them not as isolated wonders, but as keys to understanding the temples, rituals, and even the scientific knowledge of ancient Egypt. As European expeditions returned to Egypt in the 19th century, they uncovered more obelisks lying shattered or buried beneath the sand. Some were found near temples, others had toppled during earthquakes or had been dismantled and reused in later structures. Every discovery deepened the mystery of how such massive stones had been carved, moved, and raised with such flawless precision. Scholars proposed countless theories: massive ramps, sand pits, counterweights, but none could fully replicate what the ancients had achieved. The more they learned, the more questions emerged. It was as if the stones were protecting their final secret. Meanwhile, Egypt's allure only grew stronger. Travelers from around the world came to marvel at the ruins. Artists painted romantic visions of the Nile, and poets described the obelisks as needles of eternity. They stood as the last guardians of a civilization that had mastered the art of forever. Even as modern cities began to rise around them, the ancient stones seemed indifferent, unmoved by the passage of time. The obelisks had witnessed everything: pharaohs and conquerors, gods and kings, crusades and revolutions, and still they endured. By the mid-19th century, Egypt had once again become the center of the world's imagination. The rediscovery of its monuments transformed archaeology from a curiosity into a science. The obelisks were no longer just objects of beauty. They were evidence of human genius, resilience, and ambition. Every chisel mark, every line of hieroglyphs became a thread connecting us to the minds of those who built them. In their silence, the obelisks spoke louder than any written history ever could. And yet, for all that had been uncovered, one truth remained: no civilization since has ever equaled the perfection of their design or the mystery of their creation. The obelisks had become timeless not just because they survived, but because they refused to be fully understood. Even as the modern world studied them, they continued to hold back their deepest secret, the one that lay not in their construction, but in their purpose. By the dawn of the 19th century, the age of empire was in full stride, and Egypt once again found itself at the center of the world's ambitions. No longer was it the land of living gods. It was now a land of relics, coveted by nations hungry to claim a piece of eternity. The obelisks, those magnificent spires of stone that had once guarded temples and kissed the morning sun of Ra, became the most desired prizes of all. For European powers, to possess one was not only to honor the past, it was to declare cultural superiority in the present. The age of obelisk hunting had begun. The French were the first to act. In 1831, Muhammad Ali Pasha, the ruler of Egypt, gifted one of the twin obelisks of Luxor to France as a gesture of diplomacy. The massive monument, carved more than 0 years earlier during the reign of Ramses II, was transported from Luxor to Paris in a feat of modern engineering that echoed the ambitions of the pharaohs themselves. The journey was perilous, taking years of preparation and a specially designed ship built solely for the task. When the obelisk finally arrived in France and was raised in the Place de la Concorde in 1836, crowds gathered in awe. It stood gleaming in the Parisian light, its hieroglyphs glowing golden against the afternoon sun. Monument of Egypt reborn in the heart of Europe. To the French, it symbolized their mastery of science and civilization. To the Egyptians, it was a bittersweet reminder of their lost glory. Not long after Britain entered the race, in 1877, the British government arranged the transportation of another ancient Egyptian monument, one of the twin obelisks that had once stood in front of the Temple of Heliopolis. This one would find its new home on the banks of the River Thames, where it stands today as Cleopatra's Needle. The voyage was nothing short of legendary. The obelisk was loaded onto a massive iron cylinder, ship called the Cleopatra, which encountered a violent storm in the Bay of Biscay. The ship nearly sank, and several sailors lost their lives in the attempt to save it. But against all odds, the ancient stone survived. When it was finally raised in London, thousands gathered to witness history reclaiming itself, a monument of ancient Egypt standing tall beneath the fog and steel of the industrial age. The fascination didn't stop there. Across the Atlantic, the United States wanted its own piece of the pharaohs. In 1881, Egypt agreed to gift another obelisk, this time to New York City, as a symbol of friendship and cultural exchange, known as the New York Obelisk, or Cleopatra's Needle. It was transported across the ocean and installed in Central Park, where it remains to this day. Its journey was as dramatic as its symbolism: over 200 tons of solid granite, carved over 500 years ago, now standing amidst skyscrapers and steam engines. As the crowd watched the final raising, some wept, others cheered. For the Americans, it was a statement that the New World could now stand shoulder to shoulder with the civilizations of the past. For Egypt, it was another farewell, a piece of its soul shipped across the sea. By the early 20th century, Egypt's obelisks had become global citizens. London, Paris, Rome, Istanbul, and New York all boasted their own, while the originals in Karnak and Luxor continued to stand as guardians of history. Each one told a story not only of ancient craftsmanship, but of modern obsession. The obelisks had survived the fall of kingdoms, the rise of religions, and the reach of empires, and now they stood as testaments to humanity's unending fascination with power and immortality. Even displaced from their homeland, they carried Egypt's spirit with them, silent ambassadors of an eternal civilization. Yet for all their grandeur, their dispersal left Egypt quieter, emptier. The temples that once gleamed with sunlight reflected from golden tips now stood bare. Where once twin obelisks framed every sacred gate, only one often remained, the other lost to foreign soil. Egyptian scholars and patriots began to question what had been taken from them, not just in stone, but in meaning. The obelisks were more than artifacts. They were symbols of divine order, expressions of a nation's soul. And though they had found new homes, they would forever belong to the land that gave them birth. In time, as Egypt's national identity revived in the 20th century, the obelisks became points of reflection, reminders of both triumph and loss. The world might have taken their stones, but not their story. The pharaohs' names carved into granite still spoke the language of eternity, defying borders, languages, and centuries. Even standing in cities far from the Nile, they continued to point skyward, toward the same sun that once rose over Thebes and Heliopolis. Their message had never changed, that all power, whether divine or mortal, is fleeting. But memory carved in stone can outlast empires. As the 20th century unfolded, the obelisks of Egypt, scattered across continents, began to stir something profound in the hearts of scholars, architects, and dreamers alike. They were no longer seen merely as trophies of empire, but as keys to understanding a civilization whose secrets still lay buried beneath the desert sands. The fascination that once drove conquerors now inspired historians. The golden age of Egyptology was born, and the obelisks stood at its forefront, silent teachers towering over the modern world, urging humanity to look backward in order to move forward. Archaeologists poured into Egypt, armed not with armies but with notebooks, cameras, and an insatiable hunger to decode the past. Men like Flinders Petrie, Gaston Maspero, and later Howard Carter, devoted their lives to uncovering what the obelisks represented. The hieroglyphs etched into their sides were no longer mysterious symbols. They were words, stories, prayers, and decrees that spoke across time. Jean-Francois Champollion's breakthrough with the Rosetta Stone had opened a linguistic floodgate, and the obelisks became living documents of Egyptian history. Their inscriptions revealed which pharaoh commissioned them, which gods they honored, and even the festivals during which they were erected. The more the world read, the more it realized how advanced and spiritual the ancient Egyptians truly were. But the obelisks didn't just shape scholarship, they reshaped skylines. The influence of Egypt's monuments began to seep into modern architecture, from the Washington Monument in the United States to countless memorials and landmarks around the globe. Their elegant, tapering form became a universal symbol of triumph, remembrance, and aspiration. Cities like London, Paris, and New York proudly displayed their Egyptian obelisks as emblems of endurance and enlightenment, but something deeper was happening beneath the surface. Humanity wasn't merely borrowing Egypt's style. It was unconsciously echoing Egypt's eternal desire to reach the heavens. Yet even as the world celebrated these relics, a new question began to take shape. A question that struck at the very core of cultural identity. who truly owns the past. Egyptians, reclaiming their national pride after centuries of foreign rule, began to call for the return of their lost heritage. The obelisks, they argued, were not mere decorations for Western plazas. They were sacred pillars, bound to the soil of the Nile. Each one was an offering to the gods, placed with precise celestial alignment. To remove them was to sever a connection between heaven and earth. Scholars and politicians debated fiercely. Some argued that these monuments had been legally gifted, preserved from decay, and made accessible to the world. Others countered that the circumstances of their removal, often during eras of colonial control, made such gifts questionable at best. This debate grew louder in the second half of the century. Egyptian voices, strengthened by the rise of modern nationalism and a global push for cultural restitution, began to echo through academic halls and international courts. The obelisks became symbols of more than just history. They represented memory, dignity, and identity. As tourism to Egypt soared, the contrast became even more visible. Visitors marveled at the temples of Luxor and Karnak, where single surviving obelisks stood like sentinels over empty pedestal, silent witnesses to their long, lost twins now standing in foreign capitals. Many couldn't help but wonder what it would feel like to see them reunited under the Egyptian sun once more. Meanwhile, in cities like Paris and London, the obelisks themselves seemed to take on new meanings. Locals passed them daily, perhaps unaware that beneath the polished stone lay stories of divine worship and cosmic alignment. In New York, the Central Park obelisk weathered harsh winters and urban pollution, its once bright carvings fading into obscurity. Scientists and conservators began to worry. Had these ancient monuments survived 3,000 years in Egypt only to deteriorate in the modern age? The irony was painful. In trying to preserve Egypt's legacy, the world may have unintentionally placed it at risk. And yet, despite the controversies and the wear of time, the obelisks continued to inspire wonder. Tourists from every corner of the globe stood beneath them, heads tilted back, marveling at how such perfection could have been achieved with nothing more than stone, rope, and faith. Artists painted them, filmmakers framed them against the rising sun, poets wrote of their shadows stretching across centuries. In their presence time seemed to bend, the ancient and modern worlds briefly touching. The lost obelisks had transcended ownership. They belonged to no one and everyone at once, to history, to humanity, and though scattered across the world, they remained connected by something invisible and eternal, the light of the same sun they were built to honor. Whether rising over the Nile or reflected in the glass towers of a modern city, their purpose endured, to remind us that even in stone, the human spirit can reach the divine. In the quiet hour before dawn, when the sky is still a deep shade of blue and the world holds its breath, the obelisks of Egypt, and those scattered across distant continent, stand in perfect stillness. They wait for the first light, just as they have for thousands of years. And as the sun finally crests the horizon, brushing its golden fingers across their sharpened crowns, something magical happens. The stone wakes, the shadow lengthens, and for a fleeting moment, the ancient world breathes again. It is in moments like these that we understand why the pharaohs poured their souls into these monuments. They were not meant merely to exist, they were meant to endure, to outlast empires, to speak long after their creators had turned to dust. Today, we live in a world that moves faster than ever. Cities rise overnight. Technology replaces memories. History is compressed into headlines. Yet the obelisks stand unchanged, unbothered by the rush of modern life. They are anchors, pulling us back to something humanity often forgets, that we are part of a story far older than ourselves. When you stand at the base of an obelisk, whether in Luxor, London, Rome, or New York, you feel a strange and powerful sensation, as if the weight of time has suddenly settled onto your shoulders. the sky feels higher. The world feels wider, and you realize that these monuments were built not only to honor gods, but to challenge future generations to look upward, to think beyond the boundaries of the present. The ancient Egyptians believed deeply in the idea of continuity, the passing of life, knowledge, and power from one age to the next. The obelisks were part of that belief. They weren't just architectural marvels, they were messages. Each one was a declaration: we were here, we dreamed, we created, we reached for the heavens. And in a world that sometimes feels fractured, uncertain, and overwhelmed by noise, those messages matter more than ever. Standing before an obelisk reminds us that purpose can be carved into the world, that ambition can be immortal, and that no era is truly forgotten as long as someone is willing to listen. For Egypt itself, the obelisks have become symbols of national identity. They represent resilience, the ability of a civilization to survive conquest, time, and change, yet still hold on to its spirit. Visitors traveling through Cairo or walking among the ruins of Karnak often describe the same feeling, that the land itself remembers. Every fallen pillar, every toppled statue, every untouched obelisk hints at a past so rich, so powerful, that even thousands of years cannot silence it. And this is perhaps why the story of the obelisks continues to capture the imagination of the world. They are not merely historical artifacts, they are storytellers, guardians of memories we are still trying to understand. Even the obelisks taken abroad carry a piece of Egypt with them. The one standing in Paris reflects the sunset just as it did along the Nile. The one in London shares the same geometry as those that watched over ancient ceremonies. The one in New York casts its shadow across a modern skyline, but its spirit belongs to pharaohs long gone. These scattered giants act as bridges, connecting cultures, connecting eras, and reminding billions of people that civilization is not defined by borders, but by the shared human desire to create something eternal. And so, the question that lingers is not whether the obelisks will survive. They have survived everything imaginable: earthquakes, wars, floods, theft, erosion, and time itself. The real question is whether we will continue to understand what they stand for, whether we will keep listening to the silent lessons they offer, whether we will continue to learn from a civilization that mastered architecture, astronomy, engineering, art, and spirituality long before our modern world even existed. In the end, the lost obelisks of Egypt are not lost at all. They live in every city they grace, in every scholar who deciphers their inscriptions, in every traveler who stops to admire their impossible precision. They live in the light that touches their peaks at dawn, just as it did in the age of the pharaohs. And they live in us, because every time we look at them, we feel the same emotion their creators intended: awe. So, when the sun rises tomorrow, somewhere across the world its first rays will strike an ancient needle of stone. And for a moment, that obelisk will shine with the brilliance of a civilization that refused to be forgotten. A civilization that reached for the sky, and, in many ways, never came back down.